Yeah, we can get started. So the speaker is Professor Bernabé from IMSE. He was here last year as well. So again, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks Chetan for inviting me again. This second edition of this very interesting neuromorphic workshop on the ACN side, which is very insightful. Especially knowing all that you guys are doing in this part of the world, no? It's very interesting anyway. So this is the title. I have to apologize. I don't want to be very pretentious, no, because I just gave this talk recently because I was invited. So I thought, okay, have it done. So I repeat it here. It's basically a very quick overview of what we have been doing in our group back in our institute, in the Sevilla Microelectronics Institute, as part of the Neuromorphic group. The Neuromorphic group officially started in 2000, but we had some preliminary work, which I will go through very quickly. And we have been basically two people, no? My wife and myself, no? Until recently that we are incorporating more senior people, no? But all over the years it's been just postdocs and students and two senior people. No? So so this is the outline. I will start with some very early work that we did in the 90s, which is actually part of the PhD work of my wife, no? my other co-leader of the group, which was an interesting clustering engine, no? That nowadays we would call computing memory. No? That's why I put it here. No? But at that time we didn't know about computing memory, so I thought, okay, let me start with that. And then after that work, we did a research day at Hopkins University, and then we became totally involved with subthreshold spiking neural networks, and since then this is all that we have been doing, no? And applied to a variety of things. And here is like few of the highlights, no? That we have been doing in the past, no? Based on well, this is an introduction, no? How information is very efficiently encoded in the brain, and I like to point to this work by Simon Thorpe. Then I will talk about the Caviar project that some of you know here and actually were involved. This is something that we had between 2000 and 2006. Actually, during that project, the DBS was invented by Toby Delbruck. He was part of the project. And then we also had some improved version of the DBS, which I will mention. And nowadays we are working on the electronically foveated DBS, no? Which is like an evolution. And in that project, in Caviar, we started doing event-driven convolutions, no? Which we have been doing over several years on different platforms, on chips, FPGAs, on Spinnaker, also on Loihi. And at some point, when the HP Labs paper on memristors came out, 2008, we also had a quick look at that, because at that time we had a project, a European project on nanotechnology. So we thought, this looks interesting. No? So we looked into that carefully and discovered a way of using memristors for doing STDP with spiking neurons. And from then on, most of our European projects are somehow related to the usage of memristors or similar type of nanoscale devices in spiking neural networks for massive learning and processing. And then I will talk a little bit about a variant of STDP, which is stochastic binary STDP, because Giacomo at some point invited us to participate in a very interesting European project, NeuRAM, which was the first project in which we could put our hands on real physical memristors, no, from SEA Leti. And the first thing they told us was, hey, memristors have to be binary. Forget about using them as analog memory. So we thought, too bad, no? But then we developed an STDP learning rule that only uses binary weight, but with stochasticity, no? And I will mention that also very quickly. And the chip that was based on that we also developed, and we are still working on that on several generations. But I will just present the first chip. And then to finish, I will give a very quick overview of some recent projects, European projects basically, in which we are involved in now and in the past few years, no? Which, as you will see, most of them are really crazy ideas, but the European Union puts money, no, for that, and hopefully some of them will get to something, no? Something practical and useful for society. Okay, so let me start with this old concept of what we did back in the 90s, adaptive resonance theory. This is a theoretical framework developed by Stephen Grossberg and Gail Carpenter back in the 80s on clustering engines. So this is basically a clustering engine. You provide input patterns, and the system will cluster the input patterns into categories, no? and develop categories. That's the basic idea. If you read the first paper, it's like, I don't know, 70 pages paper, really thick, very difficult to follow. No? But if you go to page 50 something, then you find the essence of the algorithm, which is basically this. No? So you have here this flow diagram. If you understand that, then you can go back and understand all the background behind. No? So basically, it's a structure like this. You have an input layer, you have an output layer, which is a winner-take-all layer. You compute, like in a crossbar, you compute the input pattern, multiply by vector matrix, you multiply with some weights that you have. You update those weights continuously, and then it has also a vigilance system with this parameter rho that controls the coarseness with which you form your categories. If you put that parameter very close to 1, then the categories will be very, very fine. They will distinguish very finely between one category that is very similar to another one, and they will be clustered as different categories. But if you make this parameter very smaller than 1, much smaller than 1, then the category forming will be very coarse, which is an interesting feature, and you can tune that as you use the algorithm. So basically this is what you do. You do a distance computation, which is what you do from the input pattern to the top layer. Then you do some winner-take-all. But then you do this regularization computation, which is basically what you check here. You check this property, which will tune your coarseness, no? The coarseness of forming the categories. And depending on this outcome, it will inhibit some of the output neurons. It will not let them win. It will inhibit them, and then some other one will win. And this, by doing this on the fly, it will control the coarseness. So this is the basic algorithm. Everything is binary, input patterns, weights, everything is binary. You just need to do intersections and additions and comparisons. And then we came up with a very simple current mode circuit. This is a block diagram. Each synapse is like this. So it has a RAM memory inside. That's why I call it now computing memory, no? Because you have an SRAM cell. And then you have a set of switches that control the learning, the update, and control some current sources that will be added along the rows, sent to the periphery up here, and do all these computations in just one step. No? You provide the input pattern, everything is done in one step, and the weights are updated in the same step, and so on. No? So it's a very nice clustering engine. It was fabricated in a very old 1 micron CMOS technology, ES2. It took 1 centimeter square, the full chip. The main reason, because it was so big, was because of the current sources that we had here. We wanted to copy and replicate unit current sources very, very precisely. No? And this was done with strong inversion. It was not done with weak inversion. It was done in strong inversion. We used complex layout techniques to minimize mismatch between copies of the current mirrors. So most of the area was spent in doing very precise copy of currents. And that's why the area exploded. No? Later on, we did another prototype that was less precise and much, much more compact. No? And basically, you got the same results. No? But as the first prototype, we spent most of our area in doing very good replicas. No? And this was published in 1996. We actually got a nice best paper award in this journal. It's not the best journal, no? IEEE transactions on VLSI systems, but okay, so we got it. No? And this is what we did back in the 90s, no? In computing in memory. And here are some experimental results. No? So these are the input patterns. These are input patterns which are, I think it was 32 by 32 bits. No, 1, 2, 3, 8 by 8, no, 8 by 8, 64-bit input patterns. And these are the categories. So we provide this input pattern. The first category is formed, which exactly the same input pattern. Then the second category, the second input pattern is applied. A new category is formed. Same here, new category. But here, 5 and 6 were clustered into the same category. So now this coarseness is taking place. So at the end, when you apply all 9 input patterns, at the end you only have 8 categories, because some of the patterns were thought to be similar enough to be the same category. No? And then you can tune that. No? So that's basically the idea and what we did at that time. Now let me go back to spiking neural networks and the efficiency of encoding in the brain. I'm going to focus on vision, and I will start comparing with traditional vision. In traditional vision, we take a video camera that takes sequences of frames, and if you have an artificial vision system, it will take each image, do a lot of processing on each image, one after the other, and do processing which is very compute hungry. But this is not what the brain does. In the brain, our eyes, they don't take pictures. Our brain does not process frames. Everything is more continuous. So our retina is sending spikes through the optic nerve back to the visual cortex, which is back on the back side of the brain. And spikes are processed as they flow, one after the other, and decisions are taken, and so on. And then there is a very interesting experiment that was published by Simon Thorpe in Nature 1996, which basically he takes a subject, puts it in front of a computer screen, flashes pictures, and he tells him, okay, whenever you see, for example, a human, hit the button, the mouse button, and he measures the time between flashing the picture and you hitting the button. And then he knows about neuroscience and knows in the brain the path that is taking part between the flashing of the image, all the path back to the visual cortex, layer V1, the first one, the second, V2, V4, until here, and then from here it goes up. At this part of the brain has already distinguished whether or not there was a human face or yes. And from here on, then it already can take the decision to hit or not hit the finger, in the mouse button. Then it actuates over the motor cortex part and goes to the muscle, spinal cord, and so on. So, and what is interesting is that Simon Thorpe knew the technology that is underground, which is neurons. He knows the delays that takes from one element to the other to propagate just one spike, which is in the order of tens of milliseconds. So whenever a spike is generated at the back of the retina, it takes about between 20 to 40 milliseconds to be sent out. This LGN will need, well, we're counting from 0. Time 0 is when flashing the image, right? But by time 30, 50 milliseconds, this will actuate and send another spike here. This one, by time 40 to 60 milliseconds, will generate a spike or a wavefront of spikes to actuate the next one, and so on. At this point, he could actually measure, with a helmet, with special helmets, he could measure that the activity was either on one side or the other, depending on whether he was going to hit or not the button. So here he could measure that recognition was already done. And from here on, then it was the actuation part, which takes in the order of 200 milliseconds, and that he can measure on the computer very easily. Now, the interesting thing about all this is that, okay, many neurons may get involved here. Many millions of neurons may get involved in this recognition and decision process. But each neuron that is taking place in the full process had time to just provide one single spike, because there is no more time to reach this number. Each neuron involved, whether here, or anywhere, that neuron would collect neurons from the previous layer and generate or not generate a new spike for the next layer. But only will have time to generate just one, and that's it. So this is the conclusion of this work, which means that the information encoding in the brain can be highly efficient. It doesn't mean that all the processing in the brain is like this, because this is just like the first flash, the first wavefront of spikes that crosses many layers in the brain, and the brain uses this to do recognition and decision making and many other things. Of course, the brain also uses feedback and so on. There are more other processes. For example, the auditory system, I don't know if you had that experience, that somebody tells you something, you hear, I don't know, a word, a sentence, you don't understand anything, but something is circling inside the brain, and 1 second after you understand. This is not this flashing, this one feed forward flashing. This is more feedback inside the loop, picking up memories and relating things with other and so on. So the brain uses many mechanisms, but this is one very fast mechanism that we can exploit, and this is what we are trying to exploit in our vision systems, artificial vision systems. And the standard way of exploiting this is using addressive event representation that has already been mentioned before in the talks before. Basically, with chips are different. It's a different technology than biology. In biology, we can have millions. I mean not millions, 10 to the 11 neurons, and massively connected among them. But in chips, we cannot have that. We can have just maybe 1 million neurons in a chip, but we cannot connect each neuron in one chip to many other millions in another chip. But chips are fast, so we can time multiplex, and address event representation is a way of time multiplexing single spikes very quickly with nanosecond delay and transmit them over a limited number of wires, so that virtually we can emulate this massive connectivity inside the brain. And this is what we do with AER systems. That was proposed in 1991 in Caltech. It's widely used by today in the Human Brain Project. Spinnaker uses it, Loihi, and many SNN chips. As Giacomo already mentioned, there is no need for time stamping because time represents itself. So if you sense and process on the fly, spikes, you can use them as they flow. Unless you want to record and process offline and study them more carefully, then you need to timestamp. Everything is data and event driven, and time represents itself, as I already said. Now that we know what AER is, let me go into the Caviar project, which was basically exploiting AER. So this was a project that we had between 2002 and 2006. And the final system looked like this. We had, if you look at the bottom picture, we had more than 10 different boards. Some of them with custom chips, some of them with FPGAs, some of them with microcontrollers. And here is the diagram. So we had, this was the DBS camera. Here we can see several stages of visualization. The blue boxes were interfacing boxes, that would collect events and send them to computers so that we could visualize them. No? This is the output of the retina. This is the output of another stage. This is the output of another stage at this point, and this is another output. No? So we could visualize simultaneously the stages at different points, no? and observe the system live. In the system we had the DVS camera, and we had a layer of convolution chips that would detect a given circle, a circle of a given size. No? The kernel that we programmed for this experiment was a circular shape that would detect the position of a circle of a given size and tell you the center. Here you can see that we were rotating two circles, so the convolution chip, this is the output, the convolution chip would track the big one, as you can see here. Then there was a winner-take-all to clean up the output, and then this output was used to center the big circle in the center of the screen. No? So it was like a closed-loop system that would do all that in real time. And the interesting thing is that everything was done with AER. You can see here these thick interconnecting cables. These were the AER buses, the physical AER buses communicating the addresses, no, from one PCB to the other. There was no code running. Everything was hardware, real time, sensing, processing, and actuating. And this was quite interesting pioneering work that gave now to many new ideas later on. And here I'm showing quickly the idea of the first DBS sensor invented by Toby Delbrook at that time. I believe everybody here is familiar with dynamic vision sensors, so I don't need to go into too much details. Basically here is that capture. This is the X, the focal plane, X, Y, and this is time. This is a rotating disc, rotating very quickly. One cycle takes 2.5 milliseconds, and every time the edge here of this little circle crosses a pixel, you get either an on or an off event, whether you go from dark to bright or bright to dark, and so on. And these events you can collect and store, and they have a timing resolution of 1 microsecond with this sensor. Nowadays, you can, with the new sensors, we can get sub-microsecond resolution for the events. Now, if you buy a commercial camera from Prof, you can get up to 300 mega events per second, and you can store them and have much finer resolution. Then a few years later, we came up in our lab with an interesting improvement about the DBS sensor to improve the gain. So there is, I don't want to explain the circuit, but in the circuit there is a stage which does a gain from the phototransduction to the differencing. If you increase that gain, you can get better sensitivity, but you have to be careful to not do a gain that introduces too much mismatch, because otherwise you will lose performance. So we came up with this compact and interesting transimpedance amplifier idea, which could give you an improved gain without mismatch. That was the basic contribution. And because of this improved gain, we could also reduce the area of the capacitance. In the first, this is the pixel layout of the first DBS sensor. Most of the area was used by capacitances. All this red is capacitances because they wanted to have a gain of 20. Now with this stage, we were able to get a gain of 120, but with a capacitance ratio instead of 20, only 5. So we could reduce the capacitance area, which is now smaller. And with a few minimum size transistors, we could improve that gain and improve the overall gain by 1 order of magnitude. And that's why we could have this very nice sensitivity that you can see here in this stereo setup. At that time, and during many years, this was the DBS with the highest precision in sensing. Now, in in recent years, even in Toby's lab, no, they have now a very nice DBS sensor. They call it a scientific DBS sensor, no, that has slightly improved contrast sensitivity, no, and you can see very nice recordings, no, with very good precision. But this was nice, no, and actually this we patented it, and actually this idea allowed us to be part of the company Prophecy. So we were co-founders thanks to this idea. And well, Prophecy is still alive, not broken yet, but it was almost broken last year, but now they are improving. But so we'll see, no? We'll see if they, it seems they are recovering, and hopefully they will make some money, no? I don't know if we, the founders, will make some money, but somebody else will. No? And in more recent projects, we are working on the electronically foveated DBS. The idea, of course, when you have a megapixel DBS, like the Prophecy sensor, and you're watching a moving scene, like you put it on a drone, you get massive number of events which are very costly to process. No? And the brain is not doing that. The brain uses foveation. The brain doesn't sense with high resolution all the visual field. It only senses like the fovea. A little part of our visual field is sensed with high resolution, and the eye moves and reconstructs somehow the illusion, no, of high resolution. And this is the idea that we are following here. The idea is, okay, we build the sensor with the maximum resolution, but we group pixels. Pixels are grouped into macropixels, so by default you sense the scene in low resolution, like this. Instead of this, which is the original scene, we would sense it like this. And send this to some initial processing system, we call it low resolution attention system, that would tell you which are the regions that have potentially something interesting. And then only these regions you set in high resolution. There are some control bits in each pixel that ungroup or group the pixels, no, into low resolution macropixels or individual high resolution pixels. No? But then you have here an object that you want to track, because you can move this region as the object moves, you can track it. And then these events, which are much smaller events, you send them to a parallel processing system that will just analyze only this part of the scene. And you could do that with many of them in parallel. So this is the idea, to be less power hungry, be faster and more efficient, and focus just on the interesting regions. For example, if you're driving a car, it's the opposite. No? You may have a lot of events on the periphery that are not of your interest, and you can focus on the central part, which moves more slowly, no? Like the car in front or the driver coming in front. No? And just use this part in high resolution and ignore the rest, leave it in high resolution. No? And so here I'm showing some results of a sensor that we built, and it was published recently, last 2 years ago. It's a small version, 128 by 128, so this was the first prototype that we built. Here you can see in full resolution, 128 by 128. Here in low resolution, we are grouping pixels 2 by 2. And here it is mixed, no? We're defining a fovea area like this, which is sensed in high resolution, and the rest in low resolution. And now we are working on yes?
So the resolution of unfocused area in HR fovea, is it same as the resolution of low resolution picture?
It is not the same recording. So this is one recording with one setting, then this is similar recording with the new setting, but it's not exactly the same recording. No?
Between the HR fovea and all pixels LR.
Excuse me?
So I'm asking, is the resolution same for the unattended area of HR fovea and the low resolution image?
Here you mean?
Not that one, the unattended area.
Here?
So there's a racket, right, in the image?
No, it's a mouse pad. It's a mousepad with a lot of squares. It's not a racket.
Mousepad resolution in HR fovea, is it same as the resolution of the right one? Yeah.
Yeah, so here all pixels are macro pixels. Every 2 by 2 physical pixel is grouped into a single pixel. So for each 2 by 2, we only get one output. No? Actually, you can see the holes. No? There are holes in between because these addresses are not sent out. Here, all addresses are sent out. And here, all addresses are sent out. And here, only one address of every 4. But this address computes the average of the 4 pixels. I mean, we could have tweaked the visualization software to draw bigger squares, no? But we didn't do that. Yes?
Is there a difference in performance between the binned low resolution to the single pixel?
Yeah. When you group macro pixels, you get better noise.
Or is it that?
Because of 2 reasons. You have more light. You have a bigger photodiode because it is equivalent to having a larger photodiode, so you get more light. And because you get more light, you also have more area. You reduce the signal to noise ratio. And yeah, and this is characterized in this paper. In this paper, we showed that for the macro pixels, you get better noise performance.
Attention mechanism. The selective attention mechanism, is it based out of some sort of a neural network? Or?
No, this is just manual. Yeah, this is ongoing work. No, right now we have a little project which is basically doing that. No, testing different attentional mechanisms and fixing the fovea and moving it. And process it separately. Here we're just sensing, no, we are not doing any processing, and the fovea is set manually. Any other question? Yes.
So the logic wasn't quite clear to me. So in the fovea you don't average, so you have less. You don't average over for pixels, so you have more noise. And outside you have less noise. That seems counterintuitive.
Yeah. When you have a smaller sensors, you have more noise. Of course, you have more pixels.
Sure.
So you have vision, but for each pixel you have slightly more noise. Of course, when you do processing, I will show that later, no? When I talk about convolutional processing. When you do convolutions, for example, and group detect features, you reduce significantly the noise, the random noise. No? Actually, it disappears, no? When you do any convolutional processing. No? So yes, in principle, you have more noise per pixel. But for me, it's not clear that reducing noise at the pixel level is like a big necessity. You should look at more at the system level. No? What is the performance at the end? No? When you want to detect an object, doing several processing stages. No? Because many times happens that the processing stages remove the noise or enhance the relevant information.
But if I may, in this project, the goal was not to kind of focus attention on the fovea, something that you're doing now.
Yes. Yeah, here was just to build the prototype, no, and start having it.
So, I mean, regarding the noise thing, can we just do it with the max pooling of those 4 pixels instead of just adding them up?
It's not exactly the same. You could do it, but strictly speaking, for example, suppose you have the prophecy sensor, 1 megapixel resolution. If you want to emulate this behavior, what you would need to do is the following. For each pixel, you would need to recover the continuous time photocurrent. from the spikes. No? You have the spikes for each pixel, and from this sequence of spikes, then you can recover the continuous time photocurrent evolution. Once you have that, you can take a group of pixels, compute the average of that evolution of the photocurrent of the group of pixels, of the macro pixel, and once you have that average, do your difference computation to get the spikes. This would be exactly what this sensor is doing. Yeah, so max pooling, if you do, I mean, if you collect all the events, because at the end here you are reducing the number of events. When you have a macro pixel, you are not just conveying all four events from all events from the 4 pixels. No, you are computing a new average, and you get much less events. No, it's not just collecting all events with the same coordinate. No? Okay, let me go now to convolutions. This is also back to the Caviar project. There, our role in the Caviar project was to do chips that would do convolutions. The way of doing event-driven convolutions is as follows. Suppose you have, this is an array of integrate and fire neurons. This is your convolution kernel that you want to compute, and you have input spikes coming from a retina, for example. Then what you do is that for each input event, for example, of coordinate x1, y1, you update the neighborhood of integrate and fire neurons, and you update them weighted by the convolution kernel. So this pixel here will get updated with a positive increment proportional to this distance between to the center, but this other side you would decrement. And then for each input event, you update each integrate and fire neuron with a contribution that is proportional to this kernel at each position. And this you do event by event. So you, in your integrate and fire array, you would have, at each instant in time, you would have like a dynamic convolution of the flow of events coming in. Because for each input event, you update the neighborhood. This neighborhood updates. If a neuron here reaches its threshold, it will generate a new output event. For example, here, we are using this kernel, a circular kernel, that will detect an orange. We can see here in the bottom, this is a recording of one of the PhD students in the project. He was juggling. He was very good in juggling, so he took 3 oranges. He was juggling the 3 oranges, and we were recording him with a DBS sensor. And the output of the DBS sensor was sent directly to, this is the output of the DBS sensor. We can see here the students and the oranges and so on. And this output of the DBS sensor was sent directly, all the events directly to the convolution chip, programmed with this kernel. And we are seeing here the outputs. So the outputs are the center of the 3 oranges on the fly. So we didn't have to wait for images and so on. So everything was going on the fly. And then this, we designed several generations of convolution chips. This is the latest one, which was very interesting because it had a kernel RAM. In the kernel RAM, you can define up to, I think, 32 different kernels. And then you could pick one or another kernel depending on the origin of the event. If the event was coming from one place, you would pick one kernel. If the event was coming from another place, you would pick another kernel. And this way, it is possible to assemble convolutional neural networks without much sophistication. Just with a single chip, you could process the same feature map with different convolutional kernels on the fly. And I think I don't have it here, but if you do feedback, if you feedback, for example, the output of the convolution, you feed the output back, and pick a kernel that is a Mexican head, you would be computing a two-dimensional winner-take-all. Simultaneously to all the input feature kernels. If you feed back the output events back with a Mexican head, automatically you're doing also winner-take-all. No? So with one single chip, you could have 32 different kernels, and one of them could be this winner-take-all, no, for that feature map. So it could be very, very efficient. I have a slide somewhere else, but I don't think I'm showing it here today. Here is an interesting experiment that we also did a long time ago, back in 2015, which is the poker card recognition. So we have this poker card. It's a tricky poker card deck. No? You can see here everything is black. There are no red cards. Why? Well, because the retina has a limited bandwidth. The maximum number of events that it could give you was 10 mega events per second. No? And when you browse the card that quickly, like here, no, we are browsing the full deck in less than a second. No? Actually, you have to practice to do that efficiently and do it in less than 1 second. It reaches that limit closely, 10 million events per second. But you also have to set the contrast sensitivity of your sensor to be very low. No? If you set the contrast sensitivity very high, it will saturate. No? So you have to set your contrast sensitivity relatively low, like 10% or even higher, no? To not saturate the bus. And for that reason, we use plain black and white cards, because the red ones would not be nicely picked up, no, with such a low contrast sensitivity. Of course, if we lower the speed, then yes, no? Or if we develop a new sensor with higher bandwidth, no? Then yes, no? But with this sensor, our limit was 10 mega event per second, and here we were close to the limit. So here we see in real time the recording. This is this is very famous software now. It was developed during the Caballar project by Toby Delbrook, this JAR. It's for visualizing events. So this is recorded. A recording is basically a list of events. No? You have the XY coordinate and the timestamp for each event. No? And what this software does, it takes events every 20 milliseconds and builds a frame so that we can see it on the screen. But the events are there, so we can tell the software to reconstruct at a lower speed. And here it is reconstructing with frames that only have 70 microseconds. The same recording, and you can see all the details of the different symbols crossing the screen. Each card more or less needs in the order of 10 milliseconds to cross the screen, no, when you do this quickly. So each card between 5 to 10 milliseconds it crosses. And each symbol is like this. No? Now if we now take a window, because this is 128 by 128, if we now take a window which is 32 by 32 and feed it to a spiky neural network like this one, we get this result here. So this is now real time, and now we slow it down. So this is the symbol being tracked as it crosses the screen, and these other symbols here are the recognition, are the output of the SNNs. So you can see this is now slow playback, and you can see the recognition. And here is XY time playback. You can see the output of the retina, which are these. Oops. Okay. So these are the outputs of the retina, and the recognition outputs are the symbols. No? And when the card flips, it just needs less than 2 milliseconds to again recognize which card it is. No? Because you just need to collect enough events to see the periphery, no, of the symbol.
What is the latency of this network?
What is?
Network latency. Network latency.
Latency.
Neural network latency
Well, the hardware is,
for the recognition.
yeah, the recognition is depending on the data. The data sets the latency. Because this was implemented on an FPGA. All this was implemented on an FPGA, so it runs really fast. It's integrated via digital adders and so on. But the latency is given by the data. As soon as you have enough data, you compute. Actually, we could accelerate. We could accelerate the data and improve a little bit. And then see the latency of the hardware, no? But we didn't do that. No? Well, no, we did. Actually, here in this one, in the 2018, we played with accelerating, and then there was a smooth degradation, no? When accelerating the input data. It was not like drastically harmful, no? It was smooth degradation. So not all events were necessary to do the recognition. No? Here is another example. Here is using the Spinnaker platform, but implementing the same. On Spinnaker, we implemented the same convolutional modules. And here is just an illustration of an array of 16 different scales and angles of the convolutions. Okay, now let me switch to nanotechnology. Memristors, spike time independent plasticity. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to accelerate a bit. I assume everybody knows what spike time independent plasticity is, right? So let me skip that. The interesting thing about spike time independent plasticity and memristors is that if you have a neuron or a synapse, and you assume you connect a memristor between the inside of the membrane of the postsynaptic neuron and the inside of the membrane of the presynaptic neuron, and you allow a memristor in between, and you feed with spikes similar to the biological spikes, you get exactly the STDP learning function on the memristor. I mean, we proved that mathematically, and then experimentally we can also see that, no? But the nice thing is that the memristor can do STDP just by assuming that, no? That you have spikes similar to biological spikes. Actually, you can tune the shape of the spikes, and this way also tune the STDP learning rule somehow. And for building systems exploiting that, you just need to build crossbars with memristors, and the only thing you need is that each memristor needs to see the postsynaptic spike and the presynaptic spike. So you need to send over the columns the presynaptic spikes, and whenever the destination neuron generates a postsynaptic spike, you need to send it back, so that each neuron can see the pre, but also the post, and then it will do asynchronously STDP. And this is an example circuit of a possible neuron to implement that. No? You can see here, normally you let this node fixed at a given voltage so that you integrate, but when you generate a spike, the shape of the spike, you connect it back to this node, so you copy it to this node here, so that all presynaptic neurons will see the shape and update accordingly. Oops. And then we tested this in software. We used Toby's recording of driving through Pasadena with the dynamic vision sensor from 2008. It was divided into patches, and then these patches made up a total of 74 hours of spikes that were used to train a small network using the learning rule that this memristor system would have. And after training, the weights that it learned, you can see it was oriented edges. So it learned what we know the V1 layer of the visual cortex knows, which is extracting oriented edges. Most of the edges are vertical because in this scene there are many vertical edges, no? But you also have other angles. And let me now switch to stochastic binary STDP. This is when the project that I mentioned that Giacomo invited us to participate with Sealetti, and the first restriction was that the membristors can only be binary. They told us forget about analog values, you have to use either on or off neurons. And neuron when is off is not zero, it may have, I don't know, 100 kilo ohm, and when it is on, it may have 10 kilo ohm, maybe 5 kilo ohm. So the on-off ratio was also not very nice. So we said, okay, this is what we have. Let's see if we can do something with that. No? And we developed an algorithm which we call the stochastic binary STDP. Here I'm illustrating the traditional STDP, which is the more analog one. No? Depending on the delta t, you increment or decrement the weight by an analog amount. Many people simplify this exponential shapes to this one here, to simplify the computations. Even software people. I mean, Simon Thorpe is what he does. No? So he only increments by a fixed amount if the delta t is within a given window. Otherwise, everything will be decremented by a fixed amount. And this is looking at the delta t. But another abstraction that he also uses is, instead of looking at the delta t between the pre and the postsynaptic spikes, is he looks only at the order. So he takes the full system, he orders the spikes as they happen at the different neurons and synapses, removes the time and only keeps the order, and applies the rule based on the order, the rank order, n. And depending on whether it was the first, the second, the third, and so on, he applies the update. This is very interesting because you can slow down or accelerate your system and the result will be exactly the same. So from that point of view, it's interesting. And computation A also helps a lot in software, no? Because you just need to keep a list of a sequence. He actually doesn't keep the full list. He truncates the list and only keeps the most relevant, the initial ones, no? And then makes the software even more efficient. No?
But would be difficult for the input if it is velocity or some time dependent feature?
Yeah, in a physical system, yes. But in any case, when you do STDP, you need to keep a memory of when the presynaptic and the postsynaptic spikes happen. So you need to keep like a FIFO or something to know which spikes happened before or happened after. No? And in that list, you can also remove the time. You don't need that memory.
I'm saying if you are interested in the input feature which is time dependent.
Yes, of course. If the input feature is time dependent,
Like
well, then you run.
or something like
Yeah, but then you run real time. You run real time.
The rank-based STDP only applies for the learning or also the processing?
Both.
Both.
Yeah.
But, sorry.
Yes.
But I mean, if you have a long series, then doesn't it become relative? What is before and after? I mean,
No, because the order is the same. So at the system level,
yes.
so you have your list of spikes with timestamp.
Yes.
You have them. And then for each synapse, you look at the pre and the post, the relative between the times. But if you keep the order,
Yeah, but if you go back, then what was pre becomes post.
no, you just keep the order. So you make a list. Yeah. Okay, so then in the stochastic binary STDP, we can only use 0 or 1 as weight. But then we use this learning rule here, which is a probability. So instead of this, we still look at the order, but instead of applying a fixed change, we either fully change or not fully change the weight according to a probability. And this we apply to this layer here. This is the STDP layer. And then we have a second layer, which is a classifier layer. And then we tested this system. Of course, here for the classifier layer, we had to use a very bad classifier layer, no? Because if you really use the top competitive classifier layer, it doesn't matter what you do here, it will learn whatever you want. No? So we used a very simple Hebbian learning rule. And in order to compare whether this stochastic STDP was helpful or not, we compared just by using random weights. You put random weights and train only the classifier layer and see what happens. Or we trained with STDP and then the classifier. No? So we compared both, no? To see if there was a gain in improvement. And here you can see the red and the black are with random weights. No STDP, we just put random weights, and only the classifier would try to learn the problem. And you can see the performance was not very good. No? And these other two graphs are with STDP in the first layer. And there are two graphs. One, the green one, is like the traditional STDP with 8-bit resolution. So we were using more analog STDP, but with 8 bits. And the blue one is the stochastic binary STDP, just using stochasticity and changing the weights. Now in this graph, I'm aligning vertically the same hardware complexity, this was done on FPGA. So I'm aligning on the same line. The same line means the same number of hardware resources. The bottom axis is for 1-bit hardware, the stochastic STDP hardware. So for example, if we have this case here, for the same number of resources, we could use 128 neurons and the corresponding number of binary synapses. But in the case of the 8-bit hardware, we could only use 16 neurons. Using similar number of hardware resources. And you can see that by using the same number of hardware resources, the 1-bit stochastic STDP would be performing much better than the 8-bit one. The 8-bit one would need to go up to here, no? up to 128 neurons. Actually, it is funny, no? Because to get high precision in both, in the 8-bit hardware, you need 128. And here you also need about 128. So you need a similar number of neurons. I don't know why, but you need a similar number of neurons to get similar performance. And in this graph, I'm showing the number of spikes inside the network for the different cases. And we can see again that the blue one, which is the stochastic binary STDP, needed much less number of spikes for obtaining the same result. So it was more efficient not only in hardware resources but also in power consumption because much less spikes were necessary. So that was also an interesting finding. Okay, running out of time. Now let me go quickly through this CMOL chip. This is the CMOL comes from CMOS and molecular electronics. It was proposed by Linares back in 2005 to combining molecular nanoscale devices as synapses with CMOS. No? And he proposed, of course he never built it because he was a theoretician. He proposed to have a bottom CMOS substrate with nano pillars that would grow very thin and then touch some nano wires. And the nanowires would be tilted, and at the intersection of the nanowires there would be a molecular synapse. And we copied this idea for memristors because more or less is similar. So we can think, for example, if we want to implement this crossbar, no? These are the presynaptic neurons in green, and these are the postsynaptic neurons in red. In each cell in CMOS, we have one red and one green. So we have, for each cell, we have the input of one postsynaptic neuron and the output of one presynaptic neuron. Now, each input and each output will touch one nanowire. For example, here, this one touches this nanowire, this slightly tilted nanowire, number 1. And this other neuron, number 2, touches this other one, perpendicular one. And they intersect here. At that intersection, we can think of building a memristor at the crossing of 2 nanowires. So this way, we can have a fully connected crossbar in 3D. So in bottom, we have the presynaptic neurons and the postsynaptic neurons arranged in these tiles. And then we have these tilted nanowires. And at the intersection, we have the memristors. So that's the idea. So we had access to this technology. And in this technology, the problem was that the memristor needed a transistor in series. So this was the area for one synapse. No? We have the transistor, which was actually big, because you need a big current to erase the memristor in the order of milliamps. So you cannot use a minimum size transistor. It was a big one. Actually, we have here two gates. This is the memristor, which is tiny, 200 nanometer in this technology. This was 130 nanometer CMOS. But for building one synapse, we needed all this area, 3 micron by 5 micron. So not so nanoscale. And we needed the CMOS part. No? We needed this transistor inside the CMOS part. So we had to tweak a little bit the concept of CMOS. And the way we did it was as follows. So suppose here we have the array of 1T, 1R synapses, 64 by 64, and we have 64 presynaptic neurons, 64 postsynaptic neurons. Of course, these were 3 by 5 micron, not nanoscale, but still small. And of course, the area of a presynaptic neuron and the area of a postsynaptic is much larger. No? If you want to keep the pitch, we would have needed to do very thin and long presynaptic neurons and postsynaptic neurons. So to avoid that, we copied the CMOS idea and said, okay, for each presynaptic neuron, for example, number 1, let's put it here, inside the tile. And for the first postsynaptic neuron, we also put it here. But in the same tile, we also need to put a fraction of the memristors. So we took the 64 by 64 memristors, divided them into units of 8 by 8, and each unit was used in each tile. So at the end, we had, for each tile, we had a presynaptic neuron, a postsynaptic neuron, and 8 by 8 memristors. So it's not exactly the CMOS that I told you before, but it's kind of an adaptation, and it allowed us to make a compact layout, which looks like this. So this is again the 1T, 1R memristor, or synapse. Here are the 8 by 8 memristors, the postsynaptic neuron, and the presynaptic neuron. And all this needed about 50 by 50 micron unit area. And in that project, we got 5 millimeters chip area for free. So this is what we designed. We had many test structures, but one of them, this one here, which is this ring here, was the 64 by 64 crossbar using the CMOS approach, which each tile using 50 by 50 micron. And this we tested with this setup. This is how it worked. I don't have much time, so I will skip it. The interesting thing is that it was independent of the mismatch of the membristors, no? Because we only needed like a threshold, and if it was above, then the neuron would do something. If it was below, the neuron would do another thing, no? So we could skip the mismatch of the membristors. No, you can see here, this is the on membristors, these are the off membristors. They have a big spread, but we only need to make sure they are above this region here, which is the mismatch of the CMOS comparator that we were using to decide whether or not it was a 0 or a 1. And here is an example illustration of just an application of pattern recognition. It worked perfectly well. And well, I'm still over time, but let me go just very quickly through some recent EU projects that we had. This is MEMScales, which is a scale-up version of this chip, in which we use 16 cores of the same idea. So now our input patterns could be larger, 32 by 30 binary patterns. We also had a chance to work with TFT transistors. The interesting about TFT transistors is that they have extremely low leakage. No? So low that it's not possible to measure. No? But we found a way, no, to indirectly measure it, and it was by building a sawtooth oscillator. No? So we have a sawtooth oscillator that has a leakage, no? And the leakage will give you like the decaying slope. And you can see here that one period was almost 19 hours. Now, knowing the capacitance that was being discharged, we could estimate the minimum current, which was in the range of a few attoamps. And now using this, knowing this, we could build a tunable multi-time scale neuron whose time scale could be tuned between many seconds, no? like over there, 2,000 seconds, down to megahertz, just by tuning the leakage, no? Just with the same tiny circuit. This is another project where we built in XFAB technology. We built in CMOS many crossbars that could be selected and controlled, and other partners could build on top of this CMOS wafer, could build membristors of different flavors, no? And then by controlling the digital and control circuit underneath, we could characterize the membristors and play different programming protocols and do inference with different systems and so on. No? So this is a nice wafer. It was very low cost, no? Because we used XFAB 350 nanometer technology. Full wafer, I think the full wafer cost less than 30,000 euros, because we only used 2 metal layers also. It was very tricky to do the layout, because we only use 5-volt devices. We forgot about using 1.8 devices, so just the plain minimum. 5-volt devices, only 2 metal layers. But then we have this, and now they can play around with multiple generations of membristors and other devices for many years, no? And refabricating these wafers is very, very cheap, no? For just $2,000, they will give you, I don't know, 10 more wafers, no? Because the masks are fabricated. So this is interesting. Another project is this, the Neuron. In Neuron, we used VO2 devices, nanoscale VO2 devices, which have this hysteresis property, and then we could build oscillators. You can build an oscillators and then play with the phase difference to do computation on the phase. No? This is what is called oscillatory neural networks, no? That you have an array of neurons, and depending on the phase, you can do your computation. You can build Hopfield neural networks and so on. But there is a catch. There is a catch. When you want to couple these oscillators, you only can couple with positive weights. You can couple either with capacitors or with resistances, and the coupling is only positive. So we came up with this idea of building a differential neural oscillator, and then this allows you to do both sides on the weights, no, depending on whether you pick, because it will oscillate in opposite phase, no, the differential one. No? So then you can, and this allowed us to build a small Hopfield neural network and do pattern recognition very nicely. And we got a lot of publications, actually, even one in Nature, no, which was interesting. No? Spinach is a spintronic project, which was really, really crazy. No? We had a really difficult time. Just with packaging, no? Here we wanted to package, this is a memristor chip to be packaged on top of a CMOS chip, no? Just by simple wire bonding, and it was so difficult. No? We sent it out to IMEC, it took 2 years. At 2 years they said, hey, we cannot do it. No? So we did it manually, and are still struggling with that. And another option that we did was flip chip. No? So we have that CMOS chip with an array of pads here, 16 by 16, and this is a memristor chip fabricated by Daniele Ielmini in Milan. And the idea is to flip chip the memristor on top of the CMOS, no? and have it. But again, we talked to flip chip bonding companies and we are still struggling. They told us, okay, for 10K we can do it. And once we had the chips, they said, well, 10K is not possible, it's 30K. No? So we said, okay, let's wait. And yeah, we're talking now to other flip chip companies, but let me tell you, packaging is way more difficult than doing chips. In that project also, we were doing spin Hall nano oscillators, neural networks. This is a very interesting device. They told us, no, that was a very interesting device because with a tiny device, it could oscillate at 6 gigahertz, and then we could use it as a neuron. So we said, great, so we can do very fast inference, no, in less than a nanosecond. But there was a little catch that nobody knew. Noise. The noise level was much higher than the oscillations of the neurons. So we had a postdoc that was expert in RF. She was designing all the RF circuitry, so she came up with a scheme to overcome all these overall noise that was around, and try to detect whether the neuron was on or off. Of course, it was not possible to go at that high speed anymore, no, because you need to do some little averaging or downscaling to intermediate frequency to compute. But at the end, and this is not shown here because it is still being patented, she came up with a scheme that didn't need inductors. You can see there in the chip there are many inductors, no? But she came up with a new scheme that doesn't need inductors, and maybe next time I can give you more details, no? Because it's a very nice idea, very compact, but I will not say anything more. No? and we still need to verify if it works, no? But it seems to be very promising. And then the last project I want to mention is Crossbrain, which is a really crazy project. No? They want to put inside the brain a swarm of little cubes, each 100 micron on the side, with some LEDs and a way to interact with brain tissue. It will be powered from the outside with electromagnetic waves. It will be powered, and some signal processing will be done, and some signal sent back that will be captured and processed on the outside. No? And our role in this project is outside here. We will do, no, we actually are doing, we have done it already. We will do this event-based processing chip that will take electric field potential signals coming from one of these sensors, convert it into spikes, and try to monitor epileptic activity. And not only that, but also using synapses based on ferroelectric tunnel junctions. So all difficulties together. And I think this is the last one. Yeah, here I also listed some interesting circuit design techniques that we developed over the years, and which I didn't mention, but all these techniques are heavily used in all the systems that I have been describing, and which are very useful and tricky circuits, no? Mostly analog. No? This is our team right now, senior, postdocs, and predocs. And thank you very much.